I've got a little bit of lippy.
Yeah, you often have your lippy on to do the podcast. I have been wearing the one shade of the same lipstick for 20 years, and it's Boots number 7, Sugar Plum.
Well, it's working for you. Hello and welcome to Friday's Electoral Dysfunction. So much has been happening since Tuesday. I mean, we have so much to tell you. I've just got adrenaline coursing through me. I don't even need coffee anymore, although I'm drinking it, which is making me a bit bonkers. But never mind, I'm back in London. Ruth, where are you?
I'm back in Scotland. I've started doing a bit of campaigning around Scotland. So yesterday I was in Dumfries and Galloway, so I'm getting out and about, so that's good.
There's no Jess, she's campaigning. She sent us this voice note. Have a listen.
Well, hello from a not yet rainy Birmingham, which will be a blessed relief. So much for a summer election. We seem to be getting rained on quite regularly. I'm missing you all very much, but don't worry, I've replaced you with knocking 700 doors a day. Many of the people behind the doors are very, very witty and amusing, so I feel like I'm still with you quite a lot. The person who will be standing in for me today is a Labour legend. She is a woman I feel like me and my family owe a debt to, thanks to all the stuff she did in government. And to put it nicely, she is basically the mother of every Labour woman who has come since she was first elected.
Welcome, Harriet Harman. I am so excited about this.
Well, I'm so excited to be here and so thrilled to be sitting in Jess's seat and just hearing, what Jess said really nicely just now, is that this generation of women are so much what my generation would have wanted to be. They just have a sense of entitlement. They know they've got a right to be here and for their voices to be heard.
I have to say, Harriet, we had a long conversation about you and the pink bus, reminiscing on 2015. We're going to have a big introduction to you in a minute. But first, on this episode, in a week of TV debates, who is on top? How might the campaign change now Nigel Farage is back and in full stereo? And how do you write a manifesto? Some of them should be coming out next week. And remember, keep WhatsApping us on 07934 200 444. Now, there was quite an introduction from Jess there. Harriet, you've been an MP since 1982. That's more than 40 years. You were the deputy leader of the Labour Party for 8 years. You're not running again. You've decided now's time to leave Parliament. How does it feel to not be standing for election for you? Is it totally weird?
My idea was that I would sort of coast gently down to retirement to get myself into the mood for the outside world. But I'm just finding myself so absolutely overexcited by this election campaign and, the possibility of change for the future. And Labour HQ keeps telling all of us, don't be complacent, put a cap on your expectations. But I am really struggling with that because, the adrenaline is coursing. And so I'm around and about knocking on doors. So I'm failing to do transition into retirement.
Now that you are seeing potentially a Labour government coming into view, is there part of you that thinks, I wish I'd stood one more time? Or do you feel at peace with the decision?
Oh, no, I don't at all feel I wish I'd have stood one more time. In fact, I would have gone earlier, but the Labour Party was in such a dreadful state that I felt this is not the time to be leaving it with the boat rocking. So I felt I had to stay on. But I now feel it's in terrific hands and they can exactly manage without me, and I shall just, cheer them on.
In her voice note, Jess talked about you being a Labour legend. She says that basically you're the mother of every Labour woman that has come since you were elected. How does that feel when she says that about you? Do you feel like that you're this sort of emblem for Labour women? Are you conscious of that?
Really, ever since I first got into Parliament, which was not recently, it was in 1982, women have come up to me in the street and they've said, we can see what you're doing. You're doing it for us. Keep on doing it. And that was the thing about the women's movement. We were trying to break down barriers, whether it was in journalism, law, education, public services, private sector. We were all this great movement who were not going to be kept in the background anymore. And I accidentally ended up as being the kind of front line in politics. I was the political wing of the women's movement, if you like. So I sort of became an emblem, but for what was a much wider movement. And of course, now it's an absolute multitude of fierce women in the House of Commons, including, I have to say, on Ruth's sides of the House as well.
Who are the ones that you would put into that camp? Go on.
I'd say Laura Farage for her work on sexual violence, Theo Clark for her amazing work on birth trauma, Sarah Atherton for the work that she's done on sexual harassment in the army. I mean, there's women we can do common cause with. And, in the next Parliament, the women, if they work together across party lines, they can boss it. And that's what I hope that me and Theresa May and possibly Jo Swinson can all get together and speak to the new women in Parliament and say, if you want to run the show, you can.
Are you setting up a kind of Swinson, May, Harman, like an informal network of like power women to train up other power women to be?
Because I think the thing is sometimes that, you make a great battle to get into the room, but then you don't feel particularly powerful in the room. The point is that these women now, in their numbers and with their common agenda, childcare, domestic violence, women's representation, equal pay, doesn't matter which party you're in, they've all got those objectives. They can actually make that happen now. And I think it's for us to say, you can do this if you want it to. You're not here on sufferance. You can do it.
But do you and Theresa May have a relationship?
Yeah, she's really turned into quite a sister, actually. She didn't used to be at all.
Quite famously, Harriet, you called her that she's not a sister after she wore that T-shirt saying this is what a feminist looks like.
But she used to, when we were pressing for all women shortlists in the Labour Party and saying there's, politics is male-dominated, she would be sent out by the Tory party to go around radio studios to say that what I was saying was terrible social engineering and actually it should all be on merit. She was always on the other side of the argument. But actually, to give her credit, she really changed. And the work that she did on domestic violence and human trafficking has been really important. I'd say she's an expert by experience of male oppression, and she's not pulling her punches now. So I think, she's doing all sorts of things, but I'm sure we'll do stuff together.
Just to be fair to Theresa May, even when she was being sent out to say that she didn't believe in all women shortlists, it's not because she didn't believe in more women in Parliament. And she actively worked to make sure that there have been. And, there are people of my generation that are only in Parliament because of Theresa May.
Actually, this is so nice. When I became political editor, she wrote to me as Prime Minister and said, you're the first female political editor of Sky News. And I've got this letter that she wrote, and it was very kind of her to do that. It was a kind of little, kind of sisterhood. It was a sisterhood thing.
You should have her on this podcast. She's very funny, actually.
But the thing was, she never really gave me any interviews. So, it was swings and roundabouts, really.
It's almost astonishing that she ended up in something so public as politics. And I think that if she was the sort of politician that revealed more about herself and was more open, actually she probably would have got an easier time from people like you, because people were constantly at her to give more of herself. And actually, that's not who she is. She doesn't want to. And when she famously made missteps trying to do it. So, what's the craziest, maddest thing you've ever done? Oh, I've run through a field of wheat. Well, actually, that probably did fuck off a farmer. Like, farmers will not like you damaging crops. And she would probably feel that she had been naughty, but everyone just mocked her for it. And it just sort of self-perpetuated the cycle of actually, you get to my front door, but you don't get to come in.
Ruth, what's the naughtiest thing you've ever done?
It's a lot worse than that, Beth.
Let's get on to the debates. The biggest story from Tuesday's first TV debate of the campaign, I would say, was Sunak's attack on Starmer on taxes. Now, just to explain to anyone who missed it, Rishi Sunak kept saying that a Labour government would cost everyone £2,000 in taxes over the next 5 years. He said it 11 times. Now, since Tuesday, there's been a row over who calculated these numbers and if it's actually true. And I think it's fair to say that during the debate, Keir Starmer appeared a bit slow to rubbish it. In fact, when I was watching it, Sunak came out with this attack line immediately. It was a woman called Paula talking about the cost of living. And he immediately goes, they're going to put your taxes up by £2,000. And I'm watching it, I'm going, right, so what Starmer now needs to do is say down the lens, working people, I have ruled out any income tax rises on VAT apart from private schools and any rises to national insurance. It's not true, right? But he just didn't do that. And it went on and on and on. And about 20 minutes in, he kind of went, the Treasury put out a note, he just missed the moment, arguably, Harriet. Did you watch it and were you shouting at the telly?
I did. I was shouting at Rishi Sunak, but
were you shouting at Keir Starmer,
no,
going,
because,
you've missed the tax thing, or
no,
not?
Because he said it's absolute garbage, but Rishi Sunak kept saying it. And I just sat there thinking, you stood on the steps of Downing Street, Rishi Sunak, and you said integrity, professionalism, accountability. Well, that's gone down the drain, and I wonder why that is, because he's desperate. But it's not just about the debates, it's about what social media then takes forward on the debates. Yes. That's the new role of social media in politics. All the clipping and the putting on TikTok and Instagram and X. And I do worry about all the extra money that the Tories have got with all this paid use of social media in order to put round something which is absolutely not true. I mean, if you've seen Rachel Reeves, she's like been training to be Chancellor of the Exchequer since she was about 14, and she has not changed her ideas at all. She does not believe in taxing working people more because she came from a family that was actually hard pressed.
I guess the question though, Harriet, is that, when you go on the doorsteps, number one, do you think it's got any cut through? And number two, if we're talking about it, are the Tories winning? Because they want people to be worried about Labour raising taxes. And lo and behold, we're all having a row. Or, well, I'm not, because, it's not my job to row with them. But all the politicians are having a row now about the figures and the numbers. It's like, you remember the 350 million on the side of the Brexit bus, right? So we all have, it's not true. But what went in was you get more money for the NHS. So is it having cut through and is it a problem for Labour?
Well, talking to the candidates that I talk to, I've got a little panel of candidates that I ring up who they're candidates trying to win Conservative seats, and they're on the doorstep about 3 times a day. And from where we are now, it has not yet cut through. That doesn't mean to say that it won't. So Labour will have to be absolutely slapping it down.
No one's fighting easy here, are they, Ruth?
Well, I think CCHQ will be happy that the snap poll immediately after showed that he'd won, even if it was only 51-49, because he'd gone in so far behind, both in terms of the polling for the party, but also in terms of his own polling and his own appeal. So to come away, they'll be pretty pleased with that. I don't think it was a game changer particularly. I do think, however, it has slightly reframed the way in which we're talking this week about what's in the election campaign. But I think also it's a function of different broadcasters wanting to be the first to get a TV debate. So doing a TV debate before any of the parties have published their manifesto means that you end up talking about hypotheticals rather than about what the actual policies are. It is just a bit of he said, she said in the absence of actual policy to talk about. But I do think Starmer missed 2 opportunities to completely take the legs away from the Prime Minister in the debate. The first was there was a letter from the Chief Secretary to the Treasury saying, you can't use these figures in this way, which if he'd pulled it out of his pocket and brandished it would have meant that suddenly Sunak had nowhere to go because he couldn't have kept running to the 2000, and he said it 8 or 9 times. He came back to it and came back to it, so that would have stopped it. Or the other thing is to break out of what people think he is, and the debates aren't about every single word being right or a policy seminar. It's about what the public sees when they see you as a person, as a potential leader, as a potential Prime Minister. And if Starmer had just turned around and went, that's bullshit, and I'll tell you why, just broke out of the lawyer mold for a bit and just didn't do the, well, I have said that I will not raise this and that and then the other, and therefore that is blah, 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 then actually he would have had a human moment, like a flash of righteous anger or something like that, would have really reframed the whole event.
Just to explain to you what this Treasury letter was, the morning after the debate, this letter comes out. It was from the head of the Treasury saying, please do not say that these are independent forecasts. They are not independent forecasts, because what happens is Conservative Party advisors asked the Treasury to put numbers together based on their interpretation of Labour policies. So they can do that if they want, but then to say that these are somehow Treasury forecasts, which give this kind of legitimacy to it when it's actually very political, and Labour do the same for the Conservatives, that was just not true, and the Treasury therefore had to correct it. But Ruth, you are right that in the moment, that untruth that they were independent in that way was allowed to live on. I watched the debate and I thought, I don't think either of these guys are winning. And I sort of said, I think it's pretty much a score draw. And at the time, in the moment, I was like, Sunak will be disappointed that this is not a clear win for him. But then the more I thought about it as the hours went on, I was like, no, he'll be delighted by this. Because if you're 20 points behind and you kind of meet the man that is really far ahead of you and you feel like you've at least given him a roughing up and maybe changed the narrative a bit, that will feel like a win for them, won't it? Harriet, what do you think?
Well, I think if it is, it's going to be a bit of a short-term respite. And I think what you saw with Keir Starmer is the sort of person he is. You know, he doesn't shoot from the hip. He's serious, professional, reassuring, considered. And, you know, I think that the thing about this Treasury letter is what Rishi Sunak did is he said, you can trust these figures because they came from the civil service. They came from the Treasury. Now, that is dragging the civil service and the Treasury into politics, which is a really bad thing to do. And people will say, oh yeah, but Labour used to do that as well. When we were in government, we would use the Treasury in order to put figures in, to get figures out that we wanted to use them in a political campaign. And I think actually what would be very good for Keir Starmer to do, if he gets into government, which I hope he will, is to say, we're not going to do that anymore. I think actually people don't like it. It undermines the civil service's impartiality. You shouldn't, as government, use the civil service to your own political ends.
So afterwards, I messaged one of his team and I was like, how do you think that went? And they said, Keir did well. He was more convincing and warmer on health, education and national security and doesn't have 14 years of failure to live down. This is another Labour figure. I asked, how are you feeling about the election? They're saying they're still feeling good about the fundamentals. The election is change versus more of the same. And they think that the day after the debate, you know, the morning after and the night after, the chat was all about Sunak being desperate and lying. Of course, they're always going to do a tax attack. It's what they do every election, but voters haven't forgotten. It's Rishi Sunak who put taxes up. Ruth, what do you think?
So in terms of where I think it fell, I do think that CCHQ will be happy that the tax stuff is kind of a win today. I think what they've got to worry about is that it's not a loss tomorrow, if you know what I mean, on the grounds that the best way to get a message across to the electorate in the short space of time that you have in an election is to tell them something that they think they already know. So landing a line that Labour will cost you more in tax is something that the Conservatives certainly feel that the voters already think that Labour is more expensive, they'll put your taxes up. However, the pivot that Labour have done post that election debate is that they've said, like, look, we can prove that he lied. And, you know, there is an argument that says that lots of voters out there think that you can't trust any politicians. So, you know, if they're saying, look, he's a proven liar, you can't trust a thing he says, if they can land that in the next few days, then actually what becomes a tactical win could become a strategic loss further down the line. I think the point about warmth is quite interesting because I think CCHQ will be happy that the Prime Minister looked up for it. He was peppy, he was scrappy and all the rest of it. I think one of the moments in the debate was when someone was talking about batch cooking because they were frightened to run their oven at peak times. Keir Starmer was able to say, look, I'm sorry that you feel like you're in that position. And that kind of, that sense of empathy was there. So the ideal that you want in a leader is both warmth and strength. And I'm not sure that we saw a similar moment from the Prime Minister. I also think that he needs to, if I was advising him, you need to find a way to keep the energy up without cutting across other people speaking and looking rude, because there's a particular strain of Conservative voter that does not like discourtesy. And almost kind of get away with it with Starmer, but cutting across Julie Etchingham as a woman, as the moderator, as the person that's supposed to be the respect figure in the debate, I mean, that's a clear no-no, so I would fix that. And if I was advising Labour, I would tell them to get stronger colours for Keir and sort out the makeup as well, because in TV debates, it does matter how you looked, and there was something that just looked a bit off, I thought.
Was it? What do you think that was? I didn't notice that.
Well, I thought his tie was too pale. I thought his suit could have done with being a bit stronger. I mean, this sounds so fatuous, and I know that this sounds shallow, but it does actually matter. But I also thought that whatever in terms of the TV makeup that they'd used, it slightly made him look different to how we've seen him in the past. It was too flat a colour, and it was too far from his own skin tone. So I would suggest that they make sure that they're on that at the next one.
You can send the fee for Ruth's.
Yeah, what do I know? I'm not running to be Prime Minister. I've never been in number 10.
Labour HQ, you can send the fee to me at Sky News. I'll be sure to pass it on to her.
Yeah, sure you will. You'll spend it all in lipstick.
Oh, yes. Well, my lipstick budget is enormous. Look, the point is visuals matter. Look, I think from the Conservative side, I think they are pepped up by it. You know, I was asking someone in his team about it this morning, and they're straight on to Labour now for failing to rule out family house tax rises. They've got a series of other things like, are you going to raise stamp duty? Are you going to move council tax bans? They're saying Labour's sums don't add up, and that's why they've reacted with fury to avoid answers to detailed questions on numbers. They're saying that Labour shadow ministers are going on TV programmes and having, quote, car crashes about tax, right? And the thing is, whatever you feel about it, it kind of has lit up the campaign a bit, right?
Well, it might be that the young folk in Tory central office are feeling all pepped up about this, and they clearly are. But actually, I would be very surprised if the candidates were, because the truth about that woman who was talking about the real cost of living squeeze on her is that is her daily experience. The living reality of people's experience of the Conservative government doesn't matter what he says on the TV debates, that is round Rishi Sunak's neck.
The thing that was fascinating watching that debate, and I thought Rishi Sunak did exceptionally well, actually, Ruth, and I'd like your view on this, was he seemed to kind of somehow try and park 14 years of actual government record, and he turned it into a kind of referendum, really, on should Keir Starmer be Prime Minister and what would Keir Starmer do in the future. And I actually thought that was quite intellectually adept of him. What did you think?
You're right, he did manage to flip the narrative a bit. And I think you talked earlier about fundamentals. In the United Kingdom, since we've had kind of detailed polling on different strands and issues, nobody has ever won when they've been behind on either or both of leadership or the economy. Clearly, it would be very difficult for Rishi to suddenly soar ahead in terms of the leadership side of things. So they're clearly focusing in on the economy because they think that they can be ahead on that. So I think that that's part of it, but it might be in Rishi Sunak's favour that Keir Starmer only agreed to 2 debates, because if that becomes the narrative, that it's about what would Keir Starmer do. I mean, we're having this as if any of this matters, Beth, and all we've seen in the polls is that nothing has happened apart from Reform entered the race and the Tories went down again. So we're talking about this as if the debates decide the election, and debates do not decide the election.
Honestly, Ruth, this is like the Ruth Beth hive brain, because I have literally just written down, for all of this, I should tell everyone, I checked the Sky News poll of polls this morning. You can find the tracker on our website somewhere. We basically go through all the polls and we collate them. Well, I don't. Will Jennings does, because he's a psophologist. That means an election person, and I am not. I actually took me a while to even learn the word psophologist, but now I know it. I like to say it a lot because it makes it sound really clever. Anyway, the Conservatives are still 21 points behind in the polls. We are 2 weeks in to this general election, so we need to see in the coming weeks, Harriet, whether they shift in the polls.
In the coming days, what might happen, because of course the Nigel Farage bombshell is only recently happened. And the question is that going to mean that some people who would otherwise have voted Tory actually going to move away from the Tory, not loving Labour, but just not voting Tory anymore?
This is beautiful, because I was about to go to a break to segue into reform. So thank you, Harriet. We'll be back in a minute. OK, we're back. Let's talk a bit more about the Tories because there was still some struggles with a bit of campaign dysfunction this week. First, there was a Sky YouGov poll which suggested Labour was on course to win a historic landslide and get a whopping 194-seat majority. Now, that would be a century knockout. That's the best result for a century since, like, the 1920s. Harriet, you remember when Tony Blair won in 97. You were one of Blair's babes, weren't you?
I mean, it was ridiculous that they called us that. We didn't call ourselves that. We felt, very sort of paranoid about that. We should have just owned it, actually, but,
OK, so look, you have this perspective that, not that many people have. You were there in 97 for the Blair landslide. There's talk now of a Keir Starmer landslide. Do you believe it? Do you feel it? Do you think it's going to happen?
Well, you never, ever want to tempt fate. And it's outside your control because every single voter, they've got control of the situation and you haven't. And it's absolutely deadly to preempt it. Okay. But I do remember the landslide that in 1997, and there was not a room big enough in Parliament for Tony Blair's new MPs to meet. We had to go over the road to Church Hall and have an enormous hall for us to meet because there were so many of us. But Church House will not even be big enough if Keir Starmer gets anticipated.
OK, let me put it another way. How does it feel viscerally to you? How does it feel on the ground compared to 97? Do you feel an energy? I remember the Blair years. I was a teenager. I was at university. I was studying politics. And I remember there was an energy in the country about it. I remember it. Do you remember it? And is it the same now or different?
I think it's slightly different. There is undoubtedly a massive energy in our candidates. There's all sorts of Labour candidates in seats which ought to be completely unwinnable for Labour, who are massively energised and who think they're in with a chance. And what they're finding on the doorstep is not that people are all saying, right, I'm not voting Tory ever again and I'm going to vote for Labour. It's just that whether you're in Scotland and you're facing the SNP vote is very soft. People have been voting SNP for ages, but they just are not sure anymore. And people who voted Tory in previous elections are kind of not sure anymore. So what our candidates, who are incredibly enthusiastic and fizzing with optimism and determination, they've got to actually turn that softness of the vote into actual votes. And that, I don't think that has actually happened yet.
Blair was more charismatic, wasn't he? And Keir does not have that.
But people didn't say that. This is false memory syndrome here. They did not say that at the time.
Not?
They said
what did they say about him?
He was Bambi. They thought he was wet.
I do remember, Harriet, because that was my first election I was able to vote in. I do remember that this idea that he was like God's gift to charisma and exactly what, women swooned in his presence, it just wasn't there at the time. That came later.
It did.
Thank you for talking to me about Tony Blair and reminded me of things I forgot. Right, the massive poll lead, Labour poll lead, that wasn't all the Tories had to contend with this week because not only did that poll come out on Monday, but another thing came out on Monday, which was Nigel Farage came out. He's back. He decided he is taking over as leader of Reform and he is standing as an MP. He's going to go for the seat in Clacton. I think it's his 8th attempt from memory. YouGov did some more polling for Sky and that put Reform just 2 points behind the Tories. The Conservatives on 19, Reform on 17. Ruth,
yeah,
how much of a problem is this for Rishi Sunak?
I think it is. I think it's a problem on two fronts. One, the electoral front. I don't personally, and we've talked about this, believe that Reform are going to win a ton of MPs across the United Kingdom. But we have seen previously with anti-Brexit, right-of-centre parties like UKIP, that while they don't necessarily win a lot of MPs, they can take a lot of votes. But the other strand of this is that it's another way in which the party is uneasy at the decisions that Rishi Sunak has made. Because if he'd had an October election, October-November, as we all thought it was going to be, one, we wouldn't be 100 candidates behind Labour in terms of having candidates, right up to the wire in every seat. But also, Farage couldn't have come back. He'd be too busy. He'd have signed contracts over in the States to talk about the American election. He'd be doing stuff for GB News. He wouldn't physically be able to do it. This has opened the door for a Farage comeback in a way that an October election just wouldn't have done.
Yeah, Ruth, a former cabinet minister actually messaged me after this announcement happened, exactly along the lines. They said, we should have always gone in autumn. The timing of the election's madness. The Prime Minister wasn't ready. CCHQ is still not ready. And the MRP poll is pre the Nigel Farage announcement. And they also said exactly what you just said. People are angry at election being called and handled so badly. And that's before the mess of candidate selections you just went to. And then vis-a-vis Farage, exactly what you said, which was if they'd done it in the autumn, he wouldn't have run. So
it's just the weirdest thing, because he is in control and it was his decision, but he seems to have taken his own side by surprise. Because we knew in Labour we weren't in control, we had to be ready. So all our candidates, as soon as they were selected, they were told, you have got to do a video of why you are the best person for this constituency, and it's got to be ready to drop from tomorrow because we don't know when the election's going to be called. And here's the target seats that all the safe seats have got to go out to, and all the twinning. Anyway, what happened when the election was called is I went in, obviously, to pack up my office, and I was going to be wanting to say goodbye to all my Labour colleagues and everything. There was no Labour MPs there. Literally, their videos had gone out. And they'd all gone. And they'd not gone to their own constituencies. They'd gone off to the targets that they hoped to win. There was literally no Labour MPs there. The place was teeming with Tory MPs all hugging each other and saying goodbye. It was like at a funeral. So I thought this is so paradoxical, because it was his decision and they were not ready. And because we knew it wasn't our decision, we were ready.
Labour had to be ready, and this was what they were saying to me all the way up to it. They had to be ready for May. Look, I want to ask both of you one thing to end this bit on. Something I really didn't like this week, and I can take quite a lot. I do not like people being physically messed with, be it, the glitter over Starmer at conference, and we had Farage with a milkshake. The thing about Nigel Farage having a milkshake thrown at him, I mean, it shows the public can be unpredictable. Does it make it difficult? And has anything like that happened to either of you?
I would spend the entirety of my life standing on a platform, shouting at the top of my voice for things that I believed in against people I didn't believe in. But the moment that you cross the line and go into physical intimidation of any time, I'm sorry, that's just not on. It doesn't matter if you can't stand what they stand for. It doesn't matter if you think they are inciting violence within the country. Like, you have to make sure that in a parliamentary democracy, people are allowed to speak their truth. And the way you win is to prove them wrong. The way you win is with arguments. It is not by throwing milkshakes or whatever over them. I feel really uncomfortable with that. While, we live our day-to-day lives wanting to get out and speak to as many people as possible and being able to put our truth as best we can, there is always that sense of vulnerability at the back of our minds. And, we can't stamp that out hard enough.
And I think it's bad for our democracy in two ways, because it's important for candidates to be able to go out and about and to mingle with people so that people can see them and people can put questions to them and people can talk to them. And that is an important asset in our democracy, which is different from lots of other countries. But it's also important for politicians to be able to get out amongst people and hear what they're actually saying. And I used to just pick a high street and just advertise on Twitter that I was going there and just talk to people doing their shopping. And, if you have a climate where people think it's all right to throw things at you, you stop doing that.
Has anything like that ever happened to you, Harriet?
Fathers for Justice were my main, people who would be physically intimidating. They went up on my roof at home. They climbed up on my roof. And when we were doing our pink bus campaign on women's votes, they used to chant over on a microphone so people couldn't hear what we were saying. So they did intimidation, which really restricted what we could do.
We were talking a bit earlier about politicians getting thick skins. Did it ever get to you?
No, but it frustrated me because I knew that there were loads of women who would want to come out and meet the pink bus, and that they would be utterly deterred by a load of men with megaphones shouting over the top of us, and they couldn't approach us because there would be this ring of angry men from Fathers for Justice. And they were affecting not our rights as politicians, they were affecting the rights of other people in the public to actually have their moment of having their say. So I think it's absolutely deadly serious. I know there's a charge has been laid, so we can't really speak about it. But I think that the sense that we're not protecting politicians, we're protecting our democracy. No daubing on people's offices, no jostling of people, and no incitement. I don't want any incitement in this campaign by any party saying things which are likely to incite people to be threatening.
Yes.
You know, we tell these stories, and I don't actually often talk about it, but we tell these stories to kind of explain context. But my worry is that it puts other people off, because we need good people to do politics. I still believe in politics. I believe in the power of politics. I'm not cynical about this job that we do. I want good people to stand, but it's a shame that they have to know what it is that they're now getting into.
Let's move on. I'm glad we had that conversation, though. Now, we have had loads of emails and WhatsApp messages, and you are still sharing your pictures of pets' names after politicians. Harriet, we also have an email from Mary that I think you can answer. Here we go. How do you fund an individual MP's campaign? Are there limits on how much you're allowed to spend?
There are limits that you're allowed to spend, and there's limits for overall that the party can spend as well. And one of the things that I thought was a very bad move was in November last year, the Conservatives, because they're the government and were able to do this, put up the amount that each individual party can spend from £19 million on general election campaign to £37 million. And I think that really we should have much less spending on election campaigns, and we should have caps on that. Because, you know, you've got TikTok, you've got Instagram, you've got X. Why do you need to spend loads of money? You can just communicate with people, and people don't like the big money in politics. And also, but the Labour Party rules should change as well.
Harriet, there you have a manifesto idea again, another manifesto idea. They're coming in thick and fast. We'd also like your emails to come in thick and fast. Mary sent that to electoraldysfunction@sky.uk. You can do the same. Please get in touch. We love getting your questions and messages. And also, I would like, as a news gathering exercise, I'd love to get emails about how you're feeling about the campaign. What do you think about the tax stuff? You know, communicate with me. It all helps for my understanding of what's going on. But Harriet, let's go back before we go. We're about to say goodbye, but before we go, I've got to come back to manifestos, because I love the way that although you have retired, you are using this podcast to feed in ideas to the leadership. I just want to talk to you about party manifestos. Now, these are the documents all parties put out during an election campaign, setting out all the things they promise to deliver in the general election. For political journalists, this is a massive moment. We get the manifesto, we get into a mad panic. We have to read it all in 10 minutes whilst they do a speech. Then we have to ask the best question ever. I mean, it is an absolute political editor, both high and low, depending on how the day goes. Anyway, we are expecting manifesto launches to get underway next week. But today, Labour are signing theirs off, Harriet, in what they call the Clause 5 meeting. I mean, it sounds mysterious.
Behind closed doors. It is mysterious.
Come on, tell me about it, Harriet. How does it work?
Oh, well, I mean, there's two things about manifestos. Firstly, they're about saying to the public, look, this is what we want to do, and this is how you make your choice. So in theory, the public can look at all the different manifestos and choose, and it gets scrutinised by journalists. But also, if you get into government, the manifesto is very important, because people will say, this is what you said in your manifesto, so this is what you've got to do. But the way that a party, the Labour Party, gets to the manifesto is it has a Clause 5 meeting, which is representatives of the Parliamentary Labour Party, that's Labour MPs, the leader and deputy leader, and representatives of the National Executive Committee, who are elected by the party members. And they all get in a room and they sign off the manifesto. But before they do that, there's lots of negotiating and horse trading. You know, if you let us put this in, we'll let you drop that. And so actually, what'll happen is at the meeting, it'll all be signed off, but there will have been hours and hours of tough negotiations before then.
So, Harriet, how many people are in the room?
I'd say there will probably be no more than about 30.
30's a lot, though.
It is a lot, but then it is a bit of a rubber stamp, but it's a rubber stamp because all the people in that room will have been part of lots of horse trading beforehand.
Basically, the reason that I'm sort of interested as well and slightly worried about it is because the whole manifesto leaked in 2019, which was unhelpful, unideal if you were the Labour leadership. But apparently they're given numbered copies, so that they get a numbered copy. They've got to leave their phones outside and they go in. Is that what it's like?
Yeah, because they don't want leaks, because there needs to be a big reveal and you don't want people, actually spilling the beans in advance. And also, until it's signed off, it's not the manifesto. So that is just the draft manifesto going into the meeting.
Oh, hang on. Who signs it off then at the end?
It's the Clause 5 meeting.
So that it gets signed off today, but that means 30 people know what's in it. That is a leaky civ situation, Harriet Harman.
Well, I think there's been lots of what you'd call signalling in advance anyway. There's going to be a lot of things that are not a surprise to anybody because all the front bench people have put it out. So we'll see whether there's any big surprises in it. But the main thing is to get it out, that it's, clear and straightforward, shows a direction of travel, and that when those postal votes drop, 1 in 5 people will be voting by post and they'll get their ballots in a week's time.
My prediction is that once this manifesto is signed off, there's going to be a flurry of activities. Journalists try to piece together, phone the sources. People might leak stuff. But also, if you're the Labour leadership, and Harriet, you will know about this because you were once the Labour leadership, presumably once you've signed off, you might want to dribble out some of the policies ahead of when you're going to announce it in the coming days in order to get some headlines before the big reveal when you actually launch it, right?
The manifesto's not the last word. They can always add to it and say, and in addition to our fabulous manifesto, we can tell you X. And that's another way of keeping momentum.
So Keir, Starmer and team could just have a little secret one that they don't tell anyone. I wouldn't tell anyone. If you don't want stuff to leak, don't tell anyone. I mean, I tell everyone everything, so I'm shit at this.
Well, it's all going to come out anyway at some point. So it's all just, I suppose, the sequencing, as they call it in the trade.
We do it slightly differently in the Tory party.
Come on, let's have it.
So
I want to know.
A kind of pen holder. So the person that kind of puts together the rough drafts. So in 2015 for Cameron, it was Joe Johnson, Boris's brother. But what they do is them and the people that are working with them will go off and they'll have all the meetings with all the kind of representative groups. They also speak with all the ministers or shadow ministers if you're in opposition at the time about what they want. They'll speak to the parties in the devolved parliaments about what they want to have in. And they'll kind of shuffle all of that together. And then it's whatever the close team is around the PM or leader of the opposition. If you're in opposition, they kind of then whittle it down. But there's also, you've got to do a lot of cross-referencing and cross-checking because, naughty people like you, Beth, and journalists that are eagle-eyed will compare manifestos from one year for the next. So if you didn't check what was in previous ones and suddenly you've dropped a thing, does that mean you don't care about that thing? So if you said something about, I don't know, respite care for carers, for example, in one manifesto, and then the next manifesto it's not in there, does that mean that you suddenly hate carers? So it's quite a complicated 4-dimensional chess process.
Right, okay, let's do final question. Do you have any predictions of something that might be in the manifestos that hasn't already been trailed, Harriet?
I think, and I hope, that there will be something in the manifesto about cleaning up politics. People don't like it when, the corruption and lying and everything like that. And I think there's certain cleaning up of politics. So I'd like there to be a little section which is nothing to do with the cost of living or something like that, but it's just about a bit more trust in politics.
That is a Starmer theme, so I think you might be onto something there. Ruth, what do you want? What do you think? Come on, Ruth, let's have it.
I would love every single one of the political parties to say that irrespective of whether, that if they win, they will give parliamentary time over to a free vote on assisted dying. That's what I want.
Okay. That's it till Tuesday. We'll be back with the election extra. I don't know why they're not calling it extra inches, Ruth, like you suggested. I mean, this is outrageous.
I think this is do
we have no agency in this podcast?
They're crushing free speech.
It's outrageous. Harriet, you see, Ruth said that the bonus episode edition could be called Extra Inches, which electoral dysfunction extra inches, but it's not in my script. Why, Harriet? Why?
I certainly can't answer that.
No, it's a disgrace.
Sounds like it is, though, now.
Anyway, it's out on Tuesday. Aisha Hazarika, Baroness Hazarika, will be with us, and she and Harriet go back such a long way, don't you, Harriet?
Yeah, she's absolutely a gem.
You might be in the House of Lords with her. Oh my God, they're definitely going to ennoble you.
I hope so.
Oh my God. This is amazing. I'll just have a podcast with baronesses on. Jess can never come back. I'm like, you might have a carriageway drive, but you're not posh enough for this pod anymore, lady.
Hey, Beth, pipe down. There's an actual newsline just happened. Harriet says she wants to
I
be.
know.
She says, I hope to be. There you go. Actual newsline.
I know. That would be good,
It would
wouldn't
be
it?
brilliant. It would be such an addition to the house.
I'd like to. I can follow in Ruth and Aisha's footsteps in there.
Baroness Harman of Peckham.
There is already a Lord of Peckham, so I'd have to be... But don't tempt me. This is like people measuring up the curtains for Downing Street when they haven't won the election. I've got to be like coyly, modestly waiting for that moment if it comes. The dissolution honours, it's called.
Look, we're going to have Aisha Hazarika will be with us on Tuesday. She's joining us for all of the Tuesday episodes. We'll have the next sub from Jess's bench on Friday. But how do they beat Harriet Harman? Harriet, thank you so much for representing Jess in such glory today. Have you enjoyed it, Harriet?
Absolutely, hugely. But I love listening to it as well as being on it.
OK, well, look, let's say goodbye because Ruth has got business to do. Goodbye.
Bye.
And don't forget to get in touch and keep those WhatsApp messages coming in. Get me on the burner phone on 07934 200 444 or email electoraldysfunction@sky.uk or tweet me at Beth Rigby, where you'll find all my delicious pink bus pictures, the glory years those were when I was under 40. I loved it.